This is the Daily Ticker, where Dirt and Sprague visit the insiders that are covering the stories you've heard about, and some you haven't.
How'd you do that? I'm not even mad. It's amazing.
The Daily Ticker with Dirt and Sprague on 1080 The Fan.
All right, we're moving up the Daily Ticker 15 minutes because it feels like, Dirt, there's a real groundswell of America that is split on Purdue. They either hate Zach Edey and Purdue and want to see them get eliminated quickly, or they're like, Purdue is Virginia after they lost to the 16th seed. Let's ride it and hope we get value on that.
The redemption story.
The redemption tour. And we're going to dive into this Purdue-Gonzaga matchup in the Sweet 16 with our good friend Rob Blackman, who is Purdue men's basketball play-by-play. But I'm burying the lead a little bit here. We all live with regret. And one of the regrets that I know with our guest, he never scored a touchdown as a wide receiver at the University of Evansville. And I'm curious because you say your family shames you on this, Rob. What was the closest you got to scoring a touchdown?
Brandon, thanks for having me. And I dropped a couple potential touchdowns. Does that count?
That does count. Yeah, that's pretty close.
That's pretty darn close.
I think that's why they quit throwing them to me once we got down inside the red zone. They figure, what the hell, if he's going to drop it, why bother? Isn't that amazing? A full-time starter as a junior and senior and never caught a touchdown. Yeah, that's hard to live with in my house, especially with two teenagers, but so it goes.
Now, how were the hands outside of the end zone? Did we have dropping issues there, or were they solid?
I think they're pretty solid. I guess I got a little too nervous. I couldn't rise to the occasion when I knew it was an actually important one.
Well, Rob, if you ever need one, I mean, you mentioned you have teenagers. If they're not playing wide receiver in college, you just get to throw that back in their face. Like, well, you weren't as talented as me anyway. I don't know what you're saying.
That's right.
But you mentioned the big moment and dropping a pass or maybe just having these moments that we live with. Purdue had one of those moments last year, and they come back this year, and, some people get a little risky and say, oh, Grambling's going to beat them. Nope. Utah State, here we go. Trounced them. I'm curious, do you feel that, like, America's kind of split on Purdue in general of picking against and being eliminated earlier than they'd like to be versus hoping they're Virginia and running the gauntlet?
I'll be very honest here, gentlemen. I try to keep myself isolated in the bubble, especially this time of the year, when it comes to things like what does the national media or the national fan base think of Purdue? Because often I just get frustrated. But I can tell you from a Purdue fan base standpoint, there was probably about a 50-50 split of folks that thought, oh no, here we go again. Especially that Grambling game. I don't know, 10 minutes into the game, it was a fairly close game.
Yeah.
And I can promise you there was plenty of the Purdue fan base thinking, oh, no, here we go again. And the other half thinking we're going to be just fine. This indeed is the redemption tour. So it's hard for me to put my finger on it. Look, the fact of the matter is, guys, when you're the second team ever in the history of the NCAA tournament to lose to a 16 seed and you're a 1, that's a tough pill to swallow. And as Matt Painter has said, basically all off season and through this season, it's our problem and we have to sit in it. He loves to say that. We have to sit in it because it's our problem. We messed it up and we have to own it. So this is the chance to erase some demons from a year ago, and at least to this point, so far so good through the first two games.
I mean, you mentioned that opening game being a little tight early on. We were all watching it like, is this this can't happen again, can it? And you imagine that Purdue's feeling a lot of pressure going into that game and knowing what happened last year. And this might be a dumb question, but I'm curious, like, how much of a monkey off the back, weight off the shoulders did they feel after winning that game, even though it is only a 116 matchup that they're a massive favorite in, just to say, okay, we got that done with. We can move on from that conversation because, as my co-host pointed out, like in that second round game, I thought Utah State might have a chance to push them a little bit. Was not the case at all. They seem to be playing their best basketball right now. How much momentum did they pick up just from that simple 1-16 win?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair statement, and you wouldn't think that in a 116 game, but yes, that is. They really kind of felt the sense of relief, if you would, because again, Purdue had to sit in that for an entire calendar year. That's all they heard about is, hey, you lost to a 16. So, and I know that sounds crazy, but to beat a 16, as you said, in a game where you were highly favored, one would not think that's a big deal. But to this particular team, because remember now, this is basically the same team Purdue had last year. there are only two faces missing from the team that were with us last year, and they were both role players. So it's basically essentially the exact same team for all intents and purposes. So yes, I know that sounds crazy to some. That beating a 16 as a 1 allows you to get a monkey off your back and take a deep sigh of relief. But Purdue really did need that. They did need that win over Grambling, and you're exactly right. They felt like they were in a much better space mentally and emotionally than they were this time a year ago. That's for sure.
Purdue men basketball play-by-play man Rob Blackman's our guest here. They get ready for Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. How do you feel about the Zag matchup? It's an interesting one. Styles make fights. Zach Edey, obviously a monster. Gonzaga doesn't really have that. A much different team, but man, they got a damn good coach in Mark Few making his 9th straight Sweet 16. Rob, how do you feel about the matchup right now between these two?
Yeah, just looking at the numbers, I mean, these two teams are so similar. If you just take Gonzaga starting in mid-January when they got hot, right? I think they're 16-2 or something like that in their last 18, and both of those losses were to St. Mary's, if I'm remembering correctly. If you just look at the numbers from there on, which to me is probably when you should look at it, because that's about the time they made the change in the starting lineup and took Stromer out of the starting lineup. Basically, Purdue and Gonzaga are pretty even in every statistical category. I mean, Gonzaga is a 40% three-point shooting team since that start of that run. That's exactly where Purdue is at, 40% shooting team. Both teams are 72% from the foul line. Both teams are right around 50% shooting field goal percentage. I mean, they have so many similarities, especially on the offensive end. They really are kind of the same team in a lot of different ways. Yes, the one X factor, as you just mentioned, is Zach Edey. Look, he's a tough matchup for any team in the country because he's 7'4", 305 pounds. But I would also, if I'm a Gonzaga fan, I would take some comfort in knowing that at least Gonzaga's already played Zach Edey. They know what they're getting themselves into. Whenever we play teams like, well, for instance, say a Grambling or a Utah State, you can tell when they come out for pregame warmups and they look at the other end of the floor and they actually see how massive Zach Edey is. You can see it in their eyes, right? Look, you can practice against it. You can talk about it. You can watch it on film. But until you have stood next to him, you have no feeling, no understanding, I beg your pardon, of just how large that human is. That is not the case for Gonzaga. Not only have they played him, obviously, this past November, they played him 2 Novembers ago there in Portland in the PK Classic. So I would say that is something that certainly Gonzaga has going for it. They will not be in awe of Zach Edey's size because they have played him already once this season, and they know what they're getting themselves into.
How much has his conditioning just changed the way they can play this year? It seems to be in better shape, moving better, have more stamina. He's out on the court for long stretches of time. How much has that changed Purdue?
Yeah, so he, great story on that. He played off the bench as a freshman and sophomore, played behind a guy named Travion Williams, and only played 19 minutes a game. And so going into his junior season, the big talking point was, oh boy, I don't know if Zach will have the type of stamina and conditioning, to play more than 19, 20 minutes a game. Well, yeah, he's been just fine in that category. He's had one game this year where he's played all 40 minutes. He's had another game where he's played 38 minutes. He really has done a nice job of getting himself into shape and being able to physically play extended minutes and play 35, 36 minutes if needed. And keep in mind, this is a guy that's getting banged around all the time down low in the post, right? It's tough on those big guys, not only just from a stamina standpoint, but, you're constantly banging into bodies down there. You got guys hanging on you. You're hanging on guys. That can really wear you down physically. But, yes, that has been a huge difference for this team. The only guy that really doesn't benefit from that is a guy named Caleb First because he's our backup center, and he rarely sees the floor. He's a good player, but he is never getting in the game because of how well Zach Edey plays, number one, and how good a shape Zach Edey is in.
Rob, I'll get you out of here with this one. If Purdue can get past Gonzaga and if Creighton can beat Tennessee, we got a Kalkbrenner-Edey battle that I cannot wait to watch. 2 massive human beings. So I'm kind of rooting for my bracket, but also just because I think that'd be a really fun matchup. How do you see this playing out, though? I know you're the Purdue guy, so telling me Purdue wins is not shocking. How do you think it plays out, though, Gonzaga-Purdue?
Gonzaga-Purdue? Oh, gosh. It's hard for me to make a prediction only because when these two teams played back in November, the game was so poorly played on both sides that I can't imagine either coach has taken much from that tape. I mean, Purdue in that game was, I don't know, 18% from three or something like that. And I think Gonzaga was 20% from three, or maybe I might have those numbers backwards. Purdue turned it over like 14 times. Gonzaga turned it over 14 times. Nemhard, I remember he was 1 of 9 from three. I mean, just so many things that when you look back at it, you're like, that's not Gonzaga. That's not Purdue. I mean, those were, I saw a stat just yesterday. That was Purdue's worst three-point shooting game of the season, and it was Gonzaga's 4th worst three-point shooting game of the season. So I went back and watched that tape last night, and there's just not much I can take from it. No. All I know is I'm not going to make a prediction, but I know this much. These are from January 18th on. If you just take that Gonzaga team that we're going to see on Friday, I don't know that you're going to have a more evenly matched game in the Sweet 16 than these two teams on Friday night. So to me, that makes it a toss-up. Now, am I rooting for Purdue? Obviously, I'm rooting for Purdue to win. But if I'm just looking across the board at the 8 games in the Sweet 16, I would say this is going to be the best game of all of them just because these two teams are so evenly matched.
There we go. Good stuff. Purdue men's basketball play-by-play. Rob Blackman getting ready for the call. Purdue-Gonzaga Sweet 16 winner on to the Elite 8. Good luck to your call, Rob, and Purdue. Hopefully you march on to the Elite 8. And thanks for hanging out with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a great day.
All right, there we go. Rob Blackman, Purdue men's basketball play-by-play on the Boilermakers matchup with Gonzaga, the Zach Edey versus the Zags.
I didn't want to go too hard on the unlikable stuff because he says he doesn't pay attention to the outside narrative. He's more of an old school broadcaster.
Internally, it sounds like they're a little split. Like, oh, is this team going to be able to do this?
Yeah, I mean, they were a 1 seed that lost to a 16 seed last year. Like that's.
We went from seeing
doesn't happen, man.
We went from doing the show Once Upon a Time Dirt saying we'll never see it,
never.
And then Virginia gets housed by what? UMBC. And then we're like, well, that's the one we'll ever see. And like 3-4 years later, it happened again.
Yeah, it's great for the tournament because it does keep you on your toes every round that you play. And it sounds funny, but they seemed a lot looser and more comfortable in the second round against a better Utah State was a Mountain West champ, right? If I'm not mistaken, like Utah State's a good team.
Fighting Sprinkles,
dude. They dominated Utah State.
He apologized.
I think it was over like 6 minutes in. Like, all right, what else is on TV today? So they seem loose and ready to go, and that win, I think, in the opening round set them up.